Welcome to The Localist, a podcast with... Welcome to The Localist, a podcast with local makers and independent entrepreneurs. I'm your host, author of the Localist book, and former small business owner, Carrie Rollwagen. So, do you ever find yourself super frustrated because you have meetings that interrupt your workflow and you just can't get started on what you have to work on for your job? Or do you feel like in your business you're so busy that you can't actually drill down into a specific thing that you know you need to drill down into? Or are you a manager and you're really frustrated that your staff members are always complaining about getting interrupted by meetings and you don't understand why that is because you're in meetings all day and you function just fine? So all of these things can be kind of attributed to this idea of the difference between manager time and maker time. So I first heard about this on the podcast, The Next Right Thing, and it's because of she based it on a write-up that I will link to in the show notes by somebody who is a developer, a programmer, and I work with a lot of developers and programmers, so this was really interesting to me. But also I think it plays out for pretty much anybody who does creative work or who really needs to deep dive into something. So here's the idea. Most businesses, and really most independent businesses too, are kind of divided up into hour-long segments. They're kind of like what we have meetings around. So for example, my day, I'm a manager, so my day is mostly meeting from 9 to 10 a.m., meeting from 10 to 11 a.m., and so on throughout the entire day. You can probably tell how much I love that by the way I'm talking about it. But essentially, as managers, we have our day divided up into 1 hour blocks, and that's kind of what works best for us. But maker time, the way this theory goes, is maker time isn't 1 hour segments. Ideally, maker time is half a day. So it's the morning and the afternoon. That's because a lot of the time when we're making things, it's not necessarily this takes the exact same amount of time every single time. So I'm a writer. If I'm writing something, I may have a great idea and be able to knock something out in 20 minutes or an hour. Or I may struggle over and over to try to find the right idea, and that may take me 2 or 3 hours. And it's really not always predictable how long that is going to take. Or I'm really trying to get into something, I get my mind focused around it, I start researching, and then I really need to drill down and deep dive, and that process can take 2 or 3 hours, and if I'm interrupted in the middle of it, I kind of have to start again, and I really never get the flow right again. So essentially, the reason we're talking about this is that, say, a maker has like your afternoon block. So, okay, this is the great amount of time to really do the kind of work that I'm hired to do. But then a manager comes in and puts a 3 o'clock meeting on your calendar. So really, when you do that, you're not just knocking out the 3 to 4 o'clock hour, which is the way the manager sees it, but you're actually knocking out that entire creative block for that maker. So as managers, we need to know that sometimes when we put a meeting at 3 o'clock, we're actually killing a lot of the productivity for the entire afternoon. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that that person is not going to do anything in the whole afternoon, but it's just not going to be as productive. Now, this is something that I really believe in because I spent a lot of my career as a maker and have also spent a decent amount of my career as a manager. And frankly, I function much better on maker time than I do on manager time. But logistically, a lot of the times we do need to have those meetings and we can't always set our days up here. So why am I even talking about it? All right, so first of all, one reason I'm talking about it is because if you're a maker and you feel like you're kind of being driven like bananas by these meetings, I think it helps to know why. When I first heard this concept, I literally cried when I heard the podcast, and I'm not a big crier, especially not about work stuff. So it just made me feel really seen. It helped me realize why I was struggling so much. Now, that didn't solve it because as a manager, I couldn't just switch my whole schedule to maker time. That just isn't feasible for me. But it still helped. It helped me to get to a better, maybe not solution, but like a more workable plan because I at least realized what is wrong. And I think this helps us as managers too. If we see our staff continually frustrated, again, we may not be able to carve out, we probably can't carve out one block in the morning and one block in the afternoon every single day for everybody who's a maker. It's just really not the way that business works. It's not the way the world works. However, knowing that that would help people work better can kind of help us kind of get closer to that reality. Okay, so let's talk about how do we do that? How do we get closer to that? Okay, so if you're in control of your own schedule, this is not easy, but a little bit easier. So say you're a freelancer or you're a business owner, or you have just a little more control over your schedule. This is essentially like working to make the swap from manager time to maker time. How do you do that? First, just delegate which of your time blocks are going to be maker time blocks and which are going to be more like manager time blocks. So maybe you say every single morning is my maker time block. And then I meet people for lunch or for coffee later. I have meetings later. I set up my freelance meetings later. I do errands later. I do friend meetups later in the afternoon. Maybe it's always morning and always afternoon. Maybe you just do different days. Most of us have other things going on in our lives, other people we have to work around, even if you are a freelancer. So maybe you say Monday, Wednesday, Friday, I'm going to do 2 maker blocks. And Tuesday, Thursday, maybe I'm going to do 1 maker block and 1 manager block. Or you can kind of mix and match those things. But I do think it helps to know that you may be a lot more productive if instead of saying, I'm going to run 1 errand in the morning and then I'm going to meet a friend at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you say, okay, I've got to meet this friend or meet this client at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So that means my afternoon is already going to be a manager time block. I'm going to go ahead and run my errand then instead of also breaking up my morning time block. So that's how I would approach it if you are a freelancer or you're in control of your own schedule. But most of us, again, are not in control of our own schedules. So how do we do this if, say, you work for somebody else? Or if you're a business owner and you're just always getting called into stuff? The thing I would do here is try to focus on creating 1 or 2, really start maybe with 1 deep work block once a week. So maybe it's Tuesday afternoon and you just block out Tuesday afternoon for deep work. And then you really protect that work. Now, you will have to do some rearranging meetings. You will have to push back against people. And how you do this is going to kind of depend on what your position at the company is, what the culture of your company is. Can you just ignore people, or do you have to find some kind of like sort of nice way to say I'm busy, that kind of thing. Depending on, like, work that out a little bit with your manager. Think about your company culture. Think about how you want to come across. Even if it can help to kind of write 2 to 5 scripts, like little like ways that you're going to tell people I'm busy, but in a nice way, so you don't have to come up with it in the moment. But find like 1 deep work block and then just really protect it. And the other thing that's important to do if you work for somebody else, or really even if you work for yourself, is when you're the first month or 2 you're doing that, you really, really need to prove that you're getting a lot of work out of that block. So I know that this is kind of counterintuitive to the whole idea of a maker block, and that sometimes you're going to be able to knock out a lot of work, and sometimes you're just going to chew on an idea for a while. But the fact is, if you're trying to prove to your boss or even prove to your staff members why you need this block, you really need this block to be very productive at the beginning. So do what you can to prep for that time, to do everything you can to get yourself in the right headspace. And if you have a boss especially, over-communicate what you are doing in that time. You want to convince your boss that this is actually great for productivity. This is the more efficient way to work. because it actually is, but it will take some convincing. So that maybe then when you want to add a second deep work block a week, or maybe you want to redo your schedule so things are different. Maybe you say, I want to take Fridays off and do deep work. Whatever it is, you've started small and you've proved the effectiveness of that time block. So even though it would be nice if everybody was like, oh yes, you're so creative and we want that creativity, we want that work, we want to protect that, you really need to prove that at first. And this goes also if you are a manager or if you have a team and you want to provide these deep work blocks for your team, you also need to be working with them to, yes, protect the block, but also to prove to upper management, to prove to other departments that these blocks are super effective. You cannot assume that they're going to see that. You have to over communicate because this is very contrary to the way that we think of business, the way we think of efficiency. So you do have to prove that, but it is very worth it. Another thing I do out of desperation sometimes, and I probably shouldn't be saying this publicly, but occasionally I'll mark a couple days or maybe even a week of fake PTO on my calendar. So I'm in a different position because I'm a vice president, so I have a lot of different people coming at me. And if I just say I'm in deep work time, LOL. No one listens to that. So it is really helpful to me occasionally. I don't do it any more than once a quarter. Sometimes I don't even get to it once a quarter, but I'll actually just mark it PTO. So it's actually declining meetings, that it actually shows up on my Slack that I'm not available. And then I'll work outside of the office and really try to get through a lot of deep work at that time. I am actually recording this podcast during one of those blocks, so this is the kind of thing that I do. I hope this has been helpful. The article on manager time versus maker time is really interesting, and we'll link that in the show notes. I appreciate your listening, as always. The Localist is written and produced by me, Carrie Rollwagen. We record right here in Infomedia Studios, so if you are interested in doing a podcast for yourself, for your personal brand, or for your business, hit us up at infomedia.com, fill out that contact form, and we'll just talk. If you fill out the contact form, we're just going to give you a call and talk about what you need. We're not going to put you in a drip campaign. We're not going to bother you forever. We're just going to see if we can help, and if we can't, that's okay. We can also help you out with photo, video, or anything for your website. So check us out there. We always appreciate it. I work with an entire team to put the Localist together. It's not just me. Our showrunner is Taylor Davis. Our outreach manager is Jen Tucker. And our marketing and promotions manager is Elena Harmon. We also work with the Infomedia Studios team for our sound and for our photos and videos, and we also work with the Infomedia team to actually post the podcast. So if you start a podcast through us, you really just do the part that you're saying right here. You don't have to worry about posting every week or anything like that. So until next time, here's to thinking global by acting local and putting small shops before big bucks.